never know what will happen at Worlds.
The stage is set, the curtain is drawn.
没人能够预见会是这种情况。
This is the game people want to see.
新的王者诞生了
Kaboom! They lit the fuse.
你看到了吗
They're gonna win. This is it.
Welcome everyone to the opening day of the World's Group Stage. 16 teams from across the globe remain in the tournament and they all share one big dream, to lift the Summoners Cup. Now, one of the biggest pre-tournament favorites are the Lpl Champions Top Esports. Here we see them through the eyes of the Oppo Cam, the best way to capture all the great moments from Worlds 2020. And some, and maybe many of those great moments will happen right here at my wonderful analyst zone. I'm Eva Schock-Supporter, joined by Verius and by Kadril. Hey.
Hello there.
I mean, we're already underway. You guys have been on the show. I've just joined. I've missed you, and it's been quite a ride already, hasn't it?
Yes, it certainly has. We already had a fantastic time in the plains with upsets across the board, and I can only imagine that we're going to get more upsets already in day one.
Yeah, fantastic for some, but there was some crazy upsets for sure.
There were. Well, you're going to be seeing a lot of us, and of course, we have a broadcast all over the world. Countdown and the pre-match content, as well as the post-match analysis, will be done right here from Berlin. We'll be casting from LA, Berlin, and Seoul, and then cool down will be happening in LA with Dash. Now, when it comes to the group stages, one thing I know for sure what we can expect is there are great games, there are upsets, and there's heartbreak. And I am ready for all of it. I mean, it started already in the play-in, so let's recap a little bit what happened there, because if you didn't catch them, here's a small TLDR. So as we look at the updated bracket, first off, Team Liquid and PSG Talon secured a spot in the groups by getting first place, while then the Unicorns of Love and LGD followed with their wins in the knockout stage in the best of fives.
Yeah, there were so many surprises in play-ins. The fact that a team with 3 substitutes comes in first in their group, and then LGD dropping all the best of ones, and then just 3-0, 3-0 back-to-back in the best of fives. I think they definitely stepped up and they kind of learned throughout the tournament, but the biggest surprise for me was definitely PSG.
PSG, I mean, one of the other big surprises for me was the teams that's blacked out over there.
Oh, yeah.
Are we talking about them, Kadril, Mad Lions?
We're ripping that band-aid back open, are we?
Just get it over with. Get it over with.
Mad Lions definitely did not live up to expectations. No. I think many of us believed that they would quite easily get out of the groups, especially based on what we saw from them in summer. But unfortunately, they couldn't live up to the competition, and the competition was ripe this year in the play-ins, and they ended up dropping to Supermassive.
Yeah, I feel like throughout the meta in the play-ins, they couldn't really find comfort, especially on their jungler. I think that they really lacked a lot of champions for Shadow to just say, oh yeah, pick me that champ, I can carry, or I can have lots of impact. I just think that as a team, they weren't so, there wasn't much synergy. They tried to innovate a little bit. They tried to bring back the Wukong Senna, but it just wasn't enough.
It didn't work out for the Mad Lions. Now, we touched on it already, but PSG qualified with subs. That was an interesting situation, Verius, and of course, they'll be starting here with their normal roster.
Yeah, I think that many people look at this roster and they say, well, they're probably going to get worse without the combination of Uniboy and Kongyue, but I think that you have to remember that with River and Tank coming back into the roster, they're going to have the synergy and teamwork to help them win, or well, not win, but end up making it to Worlds in the first place.
What are you trying to say here? They're in a group with Rogue. Are you saying they're not going to win a game? What's this?
I think the expectations for this team are low right now, and that they're going to struggle in the group stages. But I think the expectation should still be that they are a strong contender, and the upsets are still very possible.
I think the important thing to note is that when you have a new mid-jungle coming in Uniboy and Kongyue, if you're River and Tank, you can kind of watch the games. You can see how they play, how they blue mid to bot, how they do the mid setup. So it kind of gives you a bigger perspective on the whole game state. You can watch your side laners more in the scrim reviews. Even though they haven't been scrimming as much, because obviously they were taking part in most of the scrims, they can still watch them, see how they play, try to pull out some new things that perhaps they could have been taught, and then they could probably perform better.
Yeah, one should assume that their synergy is better with, you know, the players they've been playing with the entire year, but we will see. Up next, we need to talk about Team Liquid absolutely dominating, and what was most interesting to me is that they showed different things that we were used to seeing from them in their domestic league in the LCS, and they evolved as the play-ins continued.
Yeah, I feel like Team Liquid were kind of the driving force in the meta throughout the planes. They were just blind picking Twitch Rakan. I think their drafts in general were just so strong. I think Jat, huge props to him. I mean, you could see in their Mad Lions game, Ban Graves first pick Lee Sin, and just their drafts across the board were just so solid. They had such good team comps. They knew exactly what their win condition was, and they had so many different ways of winning the game. So you had like Broxa carrying on Graves, you had Tactical popping off on Twitch, and Jensen always being the consistent factor and impact as well. His world's buffs come through. So I mean, TL in the best of bonds was just really impressive to me.
Yeah, TL Jat and the coaching staff flexing their muscles.
TL Jat, that's just so funny to me. Oh, for so many years, he's been called TSM Jat, he's been called everything Jat. Now he is actually
TL Jat
at Worlds, man. Best of luck to him, of course, at Worlds in a different capacity than we normally see.
For sure, we'll be looking out for what Team Liquid can bring to the group stage. Looking very promising so far. And the last thing we got to talk about coming out of those play-ins after 5 years of falling short of groups, the Unicorns of Love and Sheepy finally made it. It is an organization we know so well here in Europe, and now the second time a team out of the LCL qualifies to the main stage.
Yeah, and I think the way in which they did it was impressive, because the Supermassive Mad Lions best of 5 was incredibly close, went to all 5 games, then Supermassive go up against UOL. I'm expecting another 5 games. Easy, 3-0, absolute smash. And the way in which they've been innovating, the way in which their solo laners play, Gadget in the bot lane, bringing out the Twitch and having solo carry performances, like, this team is clearly prepared. They're clearly one of the strongest play-ins teams we've had in a while, and I'm excited to see them on the group stage.
Yeah, and I think Vedia said it perfectly, the innovation from UOL. They kind of took the meta scrapbook, they threw it out the window. I'm going to pick Vayne mid, I'm going to blind pick Cassin, Twitch, all these things. So just huge props to them in general.
Very exciting team to watch. And you mentioned the Vayne there. And in addition to making groups, the Unicorns of Love also get the Red Bull top play. No man's, who else, dancing around Supermassive on Vayne. It is a pick that even here in EU, we've seen a few times in the mid lane with the Caps, but you know, this was just fantastic, the way he danced around the enemy team.
Yeah, it certainly was. I think the fact that he had so much crowd control thrown towards him, the fact that an exhaust was dropped on him as well, he was able to navigate what looked like a very complex team fight and walk away with a number of kills. I think that his mechanical prowess kind of showcased throughout the play-in stage, and I look forward to seeing how he goes up against the likes of Power of Evil, Chovy, and Knight. So he's definitely going to have a challenge up against him in the future.
Yeah, it's like you're like so excited, and then you look at the other mid laners in that group and you think, okay, let's see what he can pull out there. But you know, I don't doubt it that there's more there that we haven't seen yet from the Unicorns of Love. Now the Unicorns, they became the 16th and final team in the group stage. So we're going to check out the competitors fighting for a spot in the quarterfinals. It might seem straightforward in some groups on paper, but based on previous years, we can expect some upset over the next few days. I mean, it always happens, but at first glance, I thought this is a pretty well-balanced, you know, group of groups. It's a well-balanced situation, I think, in most groups. Do you agree, Vedias?
Yeah, I would say so. I think that some groups seem like very clear, easy favorites to get out. Like when I look at Group A, for example, I think this is a group that many European fans like, okay, G2 shouldn't struggle. Here, there's probably a debate around could Team Liquid cause some upsets against Suning? Could they actually get out? And then there are some other groups like Group B where, you know, like who's going to get second after Rogue? You know, is it Damwon? Is it JDG? You know, like it's a very close fight. But
Vedias. You have to tell very clearly that's a joke because this is a Worlds broadcast.
That was a joke, guys. That was a joke. Obviously, Damwon and JDG are very heavy favorites in that group, not only in that group, but to win the whole tournament. So I think that the fact that they're already going up against each other in the group stage is going to be a very terrifying prospect.
Let's talk about those front runners then. You said it there, Damwon, and I think we can add JDG and Top Esports to that list, Kadril. You know, 3 formidable teams and 3 could also be very different teams when they join under Rift.
Yeah, different playstyles, different teams. But I think the thing that separates these 3 teams especially is their performance in their own region, right?
Yeah.
You have Damwon, who was stomping the LCK, JDG and Top, who kind of look separated from the most of the LPL teams. Sunning looked like a little bit of a tier below them. And obviously the games went to 5 games. So I just think that those 3 teams for me are the teams that you look at and you think, okay, they might win the whole thing. They have such good laners, such good reads on the meta, and they're just so flexible.
Yeah, I think when you look at kind of JDG and Top, you could say, well, JDG plays a bit different than Top Esports, but you're right. When it comes to these 3 teams, they seem a tier above anyone else just because their individual talent is so incredibly stacked in every role.
Yeah, it certainly is. When you look at most top 20 lists, pretty much all of the players on these 3 rosters exist somewhere in that top 20. And like, it's really fascinating because, especially when you compare JDG and Top, you look at like, okay, so JDG have the best top laner in the world. Many would argue they also have the best jungler. But then you go across and look at top, and like, well, they've got the best mid laner and AD carry.
Yeah.
And like, both these teams are going blow for blow in every best of 5 that they find themselves in. And you're like, wow, both these teams are just so stacked with talent, and the way they approach the game is so different. So they're extremely exciting to watch, and we're gonna get to see them both play on the first day. So it's gonna be good.
Absolutely. I have to say I'm especially curious for Damwon. We, of course, know the story from last year, but that's ancient history. They've now won the LCK. They've shaken off all those jitters, and they've said that many times, that this is not an excuse anymore. And they look like a completely different beast even to last year when they were already so strong. So, I mean, a lot of competition to go around, but who are we looking at for possible dark horses? Who could get in that race and give them a run for their money?
I would definitely say it's G2 for me. I think in general, if you look at Europe in general, they've been to the finals back to back. They did get 3-0 in both of those finals, but G2, I think there's a lot of question marks around G2. You know, they don't look as dominant as they did last year. It's not like they stomped the whole summer split, they stomped the finals, and they came into Worlds looking like the best European team. But the thing is, there's so much star talent on that lineup that I think that you kind of have to argue that they could make the back-to-back finals again. And I just think that there was a bit of sloppiness in summer. There was a regular split where they did have lots of losses. They lost to Fnatic in a best of 5. And then the only real dominant thing that you saw was the 3-0 in the finals.
But Cadril, I'm hearing a lot of caveats, though. And if we're going to make those excuses for G2, surely there must be other dark horses that we can argue the same for.
So the thing is with G2, though, is like, yes, Cadril gave you a long list of negatives. And that's largely why it's difficult to put G2 in the top 3 conversation. But the thing about G2 is they have this thing called the Worlds buff that Perkz often gets. He was the player that helped take a team with Hyanon and Wadid all the way up to semifinals, upsetting tournament favorites at the time in RNG. And I think that when you look at these players, they haven't been able to play on stage at all this year. And this is the environment where they thrive the best, and an environment where they get to focus on a singular patch. They get to figure out their strengths and weaknesses. They are a team that prepares well, and they are still extremely star-studded. So that's why I look at them as a dark horse, because I think that the potential that they bring to this tournament is exceptionally high.
And as always, it's so hard to predict. You also don't know how, you know, the teams with players that are at Worlds for the first time are going to do, how that's all going to come into the mix. But let's talk a little bit more about NA and EU. You named their G2 Esports coming from Europe. What do we generally think about the NA and EU representatives, and who could give the top teams a run for their money?
I mean, if you look across the board at NA, you have Team Liquid, who looks super solid. TSM, who's no longer forwards, and Bjergsen, they're actually a team. And FlyQuest, who has a lot of questions around them. Are they going to step up? You've got PoE and Ignar back in the lineup. But just in general, I think there's loads of questions as to which region looks stronger at the moment. Obviously, we're slightly EU biased, I must say that. But for me, I think it comes down to, for me, Worlds is all about clutch factor, right?
Yeah.
So whoever has those players that can clutch it. And you look across Team Liquid, they have got loads of those clutch players. You got Core JJ, Impact, Jensen. You look at TSM, you have Bjergsen, who might step it up as well. You have Double Lift. So for me, it all comes down to NA's clutch players versus EU's clutch players, and the consistency factor throughout the best of ones.
I think that when you look across the board, it's difficult or harder for EU and NA relative to last year. I think that expectations are actually much lower, especially for EU this year, based on what we've been seeing during the regular season and how the meta has been shaping up. And I am definitely someone that is concerned for both EU and NA teams, largely because I think the meta right now is very jungle focused. And I think that the Eastern teams have been very good at enabling their jungler. So I hope that I am wrong. I hope that we see FlyQuest upset today. I hope that Fnatic can top their group. And I hope that my ambitious predictions are true and that Rogue can upset the favorites, but I think that
that's a lot of hope.
There's a lot of hope right now on the analysts.
Doesn't seem like the way you want to start Worlds, to be honest.
Exactly that. So we'll have to see how the tournament development develops, but yay G2.
Yay G2.
Now clip that and put that on Reddit and tweet that at him. No. Of course, we can have a bit of hope, but it's going to be incredibly difficult, I think, from the teams across from NA and EU. But we've seen some good things, and you also never know how the meta is going to evolve. And we've seen some different takes on the World's meta so far. And who better than Cadril to break it down for us?
That's exactly what we're going to do. We did a meta breakdown at the start of Plains. We did a meta breakdown halfway through Plains. So now, after Plains, after loads of Worlds games, we got a good meta. Looks like we've got a solid one looking across the board as we see the Worlds logo going in there. But if we start off with the best picks we've got, I think the key thing that I've seen for me is the Ornn. I think that Ornn has one of the highest win rates in the Plains, 91% win rate. It was the most contested pick almost in the whole of the Plains. And you can look at the trifecta of the win rates. You have Ornn, Graves, Orianna, but I think Ornn is the one that stands out for me the most. This champion, it's a full tank. It can play weak side, it can play strong side, solid engage. Some may argue it's an assassin as well. So the only real other tank you can see is Sion, if you want to look for those lane swaps. Perhaps perhaps with something like a Jinx or something like that to get the towers going. But that's, other than Ornn, I think that's the only tank we'll really see. So moving down into the jungle, I think we had loads of questions. Are we going to see early game junglers? Are we going to see Volibear? Trundle got nerfed. There was so many questions. Set looked quite strong, but I think that the farming junglers definitely look the strongest. You know, you've got the Nidalee, the Lilia, the Graves. I think these three champions were so high prio as well. Teams were just first rotating it, and there's so many junglers in this tournament where you look at them, you like Kanavi, Canyon on the Nidalee, stuff like this. I think there's going to be so many deadly jungle picks, especially on these carry jungle metas for these players. And then if we move from the top side into the mid, it's also a big question because you've got loads of flexibility for mid. Throughout the whole of Plains, you had mages, you had assassins, you had supportive champions in mid as well, like the Lulu. I think the big thing about mid for me is flexibility. If you have a jungler that can play these AP junglers, then you can play Set, you can play Lucian mid. We've even seen Tristana mid. So AD carries, supports, mages, and then it all comes down to how your team wants to draft. Because if you want to go for these mages mid, you can still go for the Lucian, the Tristana, and then go for mages bot instead, which we saw from UOL. So the only off-meta AD carries that we've really seen from the Plains teams was UOL. We saw lots of Ziggs, we saw lots of Swain in the bot lane as well, even maybe see some Heimerdinger. So other than those mages in bot, I'm expecting to see the classics, you know, the Jhin, the Ezreal, the Ashe, the Senna. That's the biggest AD carry champion pool that I can see coming into Plains, into the group stage, sorry. So, I mean, we've seen the Twitch as well. The Twitch Rakan was something that NA brought into the Plains. It looks so strong, such good engage. And I feel like these champions don't really get punished in lane. You know, if you do blind pick the Ezreal, you go for a Twitch, you won't really fall that far behind in the lane. And I just think that all these AD carries are just really well facilitated by these melee supports, the Engagers, the Leona, the Nautilus, and the Thresh. So curious to see how the group stage goes. I think the meta in Plains definitely looks pretty strong, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think a lot of what I take away from that is just the enormous champion diversity we've seen across the board, and also the fact that many of the playing teams seem to just have a very good read on the meta. Sometimes we've seen them come in and have just a completely different plan, but now they have a good read on the meta and they are willing to play a lot of things, which I think we'll see also a lot in the rest of the group stage.
I think what was really interesting, and a debate that Kadriel and I actually had a lot during the playoffs, was that some of these champions that are blind picked don't seem to be punished as hard. And we do wonder how that will evolve in the group stage, because if you pick a blind pick Twitch into a player like Ruler, you can imagine that as the AD carry that he is, he's going to look to try and punish you. And so we'll see how that adapts and how it forces the meta to shift and change.
Yeah, I think it's not only bot lane as well. You look at UOL with Nomans, who was blind picking Vayne, blind picking Kassadin, stuff like this, just because it looks good in the comp. And you can throw a couple bans that way on red side. You can third pick the mid, ban out 2. But even then, if you're going to do that with the Kassadin, I feel like if you get away with that in the lane phase, then it's illegal.
Yeah. What I also love, if we're already, I love your little catchphrase, illegal. If we're already starting out with so much diversity, we're just going to see amazing things as the games continue and the teams adjust and learn. Today we'll get some answers, though, finally, to all of our questions about the group stage, the teams, the regions, the meta, as we kick off the first day of games. A lot of good ones. I mean, I heard Vedius call in the green room before that maybe FlyQuest could upset top Esports.
Maybe.
Oh, it's not on tape, so it's not true. Of course, my eyes go immediately to Dom1 Gaming versus JD Gaming there. Game 4, and possibly already a preview of a best of 5 we could see later in the tournament, Kate.
Arguably the 2 strongest teams in the world, barring top Esports. I think to have that on day 1, it's a complete banger.
It's beautiful. It's such
it's an absolute banger.
We have so many bangers. And we already get to see Unicorns versus Diarra. We get to see Nomans versus Chovy. But of course, it's that final game at the end of the day. The EU versus NA, TSM versus Fnatic.
The bragging rights.
I believe I read somewhere that this is the first time they will have ever met at a World Championship, which is really exciting. Because, like, considering how long-standing both organizations are, the fact that they are yet to meet, I think, is really hype. And today they'll get to do it, and I cannot wait.
Yeah, we'll see. Indeed, put it in your calendar. It's just the last game of the day, though. So I'm sure you'll be warmed up for that. Doublelift versus Reckless, Bjergsen versus Nemesis, Whippo versus Broken Blade. I mean, I can name them all, but it's going to be a great match.
It certainly is. I cannot wait. I cannot wait to see self-made.
I think the only thing that would have been better is Rogue versus TSM.
Yeah,
That's the only thing that could have topped it.
The heartbreak in that group draw, and we saw it couldn't happen. That was our first disappointment of Worlds. Let's see how many more we have. But we're going to keep it on the positive, because in our first game, we were saying hello to FlyQuest from the LCS. So let's give them a welcome on the Rift with Oppo.
For me, it's just about like kind of learning from the experience and just trying to do the best I can versus like all the top teams. So it's just really exciting to be able to like finally stack up against them and get an opportunity to see how they play and like where the differences are and where you can learn from. I think making it out of the group stage would be a really good, successful Worlds run for me. I think I've been to Worlds probably 3 times from the top of my head, and I've only made it out once. So I think making it out again would be a success for me.
I'm so happy to see FlyQuest at Worlds. It is a team that you love to love. You know, they had their off the Rift initiatives with TreeQuest and SeaQuest, but also on the Rift, there are no slouches. I feel they're always underestimated, but they are the definitive second best team in the LCS, and they have been all year. And on top of that, they have some of the most likable faces, I would say, in the league scene with a lot of experience in their backpack.
They certainly do, Sharks. When we look at the beginning of this year, FlyQuest made a lot of significant roster changes. For a long time, they were middle of the pack to the bottom tier LCS team, but then with the introduction of Power of Evil and Ignar, they suddenly had a significant level up and a different approach to playing the game. They then saw an addition of Solo to the roster as well, and then they just started to grow and grow. They made finals in spring where they did get 3-0'd by Cloud9, and you know, there were still question marks around the level that they would bring, but in summer, they had a very competitive best-of-5 final against TSM, coming very close to being able to thwart them, and I think that they are a strong representative coming from the LCS.
Yeah, and I think Solo joining as well, you really boosted that roster, especially in summer. So, I mean, you look across the board, you've got PoE, you got Ignar, the SKT best of 5 in 2017, so they're no sort of, they've been to Worlds before, they know what to expect. The only thing that I'm concerned about, as I'm quite negative about most teams, I always like to look at the negative first and
Start
then try
negative
to go
and then it
into
can
the
surprise
positive.
you.
Exactly.
I like it, I like it.
The only thing that I'm unsure about FlyQuest is just generally looking at their games, the only way that they really close out games is the Dragon Soul. So that's quite late into the game. You're going towards the Elder Drake then. And I think against these top Chinese teams from the LPL, I think that top Esports and JDG, I think they might struggle, especially in the laning phases.
So when I look at FlyQuest, the thing that impressed me was how Santorin was so impactful in the early game to try and get the team ahead and start utilizing those early game advantages. And Volibear was one of his most played junglers during the regular season, but then as you move towards playoffs, obviously champions like this fell in relevance. And we saw in the final who's playing things like Graves, who's playing things like Hecarim, and that early game impact wasn't there. So in my opinion, it felt like a lot of the responsibility then fell onto the shoulders of Ignar. Now, he's always been a big playmaker. Anyone that's followed his career knows him for things like the Rakan, his Thresh, and his Nautilus are very prevalent. And I think that in a meta like this, it is very important that if FlyQuest want to find success and any early game advantages, you have to put him in a position where he can make plays and be that front line to actually start things off for the team.
Yeah, we have seen, it's not like they don't do anything in the early game. They definitely do. They have a fantastic first blood percentage, but it is always the case when you're playing the aggressive teams like a top esports is you have to accelerate that lead very quickly or they will beat you even when they're behind in the team fights. And that brings us to top esports, a fantastic team to watch and considered among the favorites to win the whole thing. The Lpl Summer Champions, a relatively young organization joining the LPL back in 2018. A lot of young players on the roster, but they are so storied already, even though they are new.
Yeah, and I think that, again, you'll see some familiar faces. Karsa and Jaculov. Jaculov, of course, former world champion. Like, these players are a combination of new and old talent, and I think that what's impressive is they remind me a lot of IG. When we think back to that IG roster, it was very much about those star soul laners and, of course, the addition of Jaculov as well, that really cemented that team. But now you've also got that experience of Karsa in there. When he joined the roster at the beginning of the year, that's really where you started to see these players elevate to a whole new tier. They were taking JDG to 5 games. They did the same thing here at the end of this year. And even last year, you had players like Knight already making a name for himself. So I feel like that it's been a long time coming, and getting to see some of these stars on the international stage is going to be a well.
Yeah, I think it's a long time coming for Knight to be at Worlds.
Yeah.
I think Vedis is definitely right. I think if you look at this lineup, it gives you kind of IG vibes, you know, with 369 and Knight in the mid lane. The only thing that separates them, obviously, is I think Jaculov, he has stepped up so much. He's got 32% of his team's damage dealt. But yeah, this man Knight on your screen, he's just popping off. And I think, like you said, Karsa just facilitates this team so well. Karsa's not a huge resource jungler. You can see that he falls behind a little bit sometimes, but that's not really a big issue when you have laners like this, and he just facilitates it so well. He doesn't look for too many ganks. He just counter ganks most of the ganks. He just sort of sets his team up so they can push, make sure he hovers around in case there's any sort of threat, and then he just makes it so they get winning lanes, and then they just play team fights.
You have
so
laners like
well.
this, you know, what do you really need to do but just make sure that they can do their thing, Verius?
We are setting Knight up to be another contender for the Dardair World. Like,
No,
he is
he's
so
not gonna
much
mess it up.
hype.
He's
I know
not
this
gonna
the
mess
thing,
it up.
right?
There's
Like,
no way.
Yeah, we don't think that he's going to because like he is such a talented player and like all the conditions are optimal for him as well. Yes, this is his first time at Worlds, but he's no stranger to international competition. He was competing in the MSC earlier this year, and I think that as a player, he also like he gets to play in China for his first
Oh, look at
Worlds.
those
He gets
stats.
the same. He gets so much comfort playing at home, and I think that you also like he's such a talented player. He's an insane laner. He does so much for his team, and I think that he is definitely when you look at most top 20 lists, he's going to be at the top for most people.
Absolutely. I think we're going to get a lot of highlight reels. Oh my gosh, we are setting him up to kind of jinx him, but I don't think it's going to happen. On top of that, when we talk about top esports, they have the individuals. They also have the champion pools to back it up. 17 unique mid picks for Knight, and that's just one of them. Their top side for the rest of it is also very, very diverse.
Yeah, I think in this meta, you just get so much benefit from flexibility in the top side. I think most of the aggression in the early game or the scaling can all come from the top side. It can decide basically how your game's going to play out. And I think that if you have 369 with over 15 champions played, you have Cars with over 10, and like you said about Knight, I think if you have so much to play with in the draft, not only is it the best team from the LPL, not only do they have insane laners like IG Vibes, they have Jackie Love, they also have so much flexibility in draft, so it's not like you can find huge holes in this team. I think the only biggest hole that I can see is their early game aggression, because obviously, like we said, Karsa, he's covering the lanes, so the majority of the advantage comes from them.
So I think we've obviously talked a lot about the positives of top
yes.
esports, but of
is
course,
there a negative?
it is important to remember that we do consider them one of the favorites to win the whole tournament, right? So they're naturally going to have a lot of positive. But because I compared them to IG, in the same way that they possess a lot of the positives of IG, they also possess a lot of the negatives. And in that light, they do sometimes get a little over-eager. Now, I think that Top Esports is a team that will often push you to the very limit. And I think there are some great examples from their finals where if they win a fight, they'll try to take both the Drake and the bot tower at the same time. They spread their resources a little thin because they realize, like, hey, we're strong enough. And if they don't punish us for it, then we can double our advantages gained. And I think in these brief moments, they can actually be punished, because they try to take too much on the map. They try to accelerate the lead much faster than they arguably should be able to. And if they get away with it, then they balloon their gold leads. But if they don't, then it's very easy to find advantages and shut them down and punish them.
Very easy. I mean, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but when they do that in the LPL, they play versus teams like a JDG.
Yes.
They play versus teams that individually have such high talent. And I'm not saying FlyQuest isn't talented. Of course they are. But you're dealing with a team that will take that skirmish even if they're behind, even if they're not ahead, because they think and they know they can beat you on skill. And that is what makes this team so scary for me. I mean, you just never know. You can't drop the ball ever.
They've got it all. They've got the mechanics, they've got the decision making, but like Vedia said, they might get a bit too overeager. And when you spread your resources thin, it's all down to FlyQuest. Can they punish the mistakes? And I think that if Ignar and Santorin can pull the trigger on those mistakes and make sure that they punish them, whether it's covering the bot tower with a TP and going for a 3-man play, or if it's going for the Drake and collapsing on it, I think if they can punish it well, they have got PoE in the mid lane who is notorious for scaling mages. So he's definitely a really good solid factor going into the mid to late game if you can keep the gold even.
And I think that Kadril hit the nail on the head there, and this is why I put so much emphasis earlier on Ignar on a playmaker, because he is not afraid to go for those plays. He will challenge you, he will go for those skirmishes, but he's got to be on a champion that can do it. So I think that is extremely important for FlyQuest coming into this draft, and I think that if they want to stand a chance, like remember, it is a best of one. Anything can happen. First game at Worlds potential jitters, like FlyQuest is full of experience for us. Maybe they can take advantage of that experience. They're definitely not the favorites, but there are ways that they can upset the apple carts.
Yes, by power of evil, walking into lane, when he's just gone to the shop, looking Knight in the eye, say, I'm playing Smite, Nashor's Tooth, or Rihanna, and there's nothing you're going to do you it.
I'd love to see that.
That's some of the crazy things that have happened. So our expectations today, I mean, it's going to be an uphill battle for FlyQuest, but, you say they're in their comfort zone, of course, with Top Esports, getting to play on home soil, hopefully being ready for this, but in early days, this is where upsets could happen. And, we are in agreement. It would be an upset if FlyQuest mean to upset the
This would potentially be one of the biggest upsets of the group stages.
Definitely.
Because when you look at expectations, like, it is favorites of the group versus someone that's not even expected to get out of the group. So I
according
think that,
to you.
Yeah, according to me, based on my opinion, of course. And so I think that it's going to be challenging. But again, best of ones is where upsets happen. We have seen weirder things. So let's see what we get today.
I mean, this is the best team from China. So we've got a lot of expectation on the shoulders. It's the first game of Worlds. I'm just so excited.
Yeah, just to say again what I said at the beginning, a group stage, the best of ones, it's heartbreaks and it's upsets, but the wait is finally finally over. We are about to get into it. We are going to finally kick off the World's 2020 group stage with FlyQuest versus Top Esports.